to Victoria Rumble Room. I'm Robin Adair, and with me, the dynamic, lovely, and talented John Juricic.
You know, Robin, I'll forever want to do podcasts with you because you refer to me as lovely, and that's just not true. You got to get those glasses checked.
Do something about my taste, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
But, John, there's a lot to peel off the onion today. We're going to be talking to Kevin Singh about the booming real estate market and why it's happening. Also, Kevin's a leader in the Chinese community in Greater Victoria. He's going to talk a little bit about his feelings of the backlash against Chinese Canadians because of what Beijing is doing and what's going on worldwide in terms of anger about the virus, the COVID virus coming from Wuhan, China, and people somehow are equating that with Chinese Canadians. And I know Kevin has some thoughts on that. We'll look forward
can't
to
wait to hear from him about both real estate and this issue. Big topics.
Absolutely. But first of all, we got to talk about the circuit breaker. What's going on in the province right now, pulling back in terms of our freedoms in the face of this pandemic.
I tell you, Robin, I'll just never. There's some words in our vocabulary that somehow get misused and mistreated and applied to things that really set your memory off. I'll never look at a circuit breaker again the same way. But wow, what anger, what frustration, what concerns have been ignited from this recent announcement, man.
Well, Bonnie Henry, I think she felt, at least a week ago, she felt we could relax the regulations. And I have to believe that Premier Horgan is very disappointed that he has to make an announcement like that. I don't think anybody in the provincial government's pleased that they now are having to restrict restaurants again. You can't eat inside. You're not supposed to travel unless you have to. And if you want to go to services for Easter, forget it. Well,
there's been a real sort of subcontext within all of this, that being that young people are the cause of this problem, that they are the ones that have broken the rules and made it worse for the rest of us. And of course, I have no access to any kind of numbers or tracing research or anything. But last I looked, young people were still part of our general society. And if behaviors by any kind of or any sector of our society impact all of us, then we all have to try to fix it and not blame each other. Because there are certainly a lot of things that old people do, including me, that young people could be criticizing me for.
Well, and the other thing is some people are very unhappy because of the fact that it's all being covered by one regulation. Doesn't matter what region of the province you live in.
Right.
Southern Vancouver Island has not had a lot of COVID. There's a lot of COVID in places like Fraser Health Region, which covers places like Surrey and the Fraser Valley. Mm-hmm. And that's an area of concern. And they've actually gone out of their way to close things down in Whistler, Blackcomb, because a lot of young people, I guess, have been having their parties and they're in very close proximity. And these are reasonable things. But I read with interest a note this morning from former Minister Bill Bennett, who's up in the Kootenays.
Whoa, that's a blast from the past.
Up in Cranbrook. And he said in Cranbrook in the last year, they've had 2 cases of COVID, yet all their restaurants and all that industry is having to close. And he's saying, why is it one shoe fits all? So that's a question. And I know that's been the policy in BC, and we're going to get through it. But
that's a real legitimate question, and I don't know who we can get on that could talk at some depth or with some expertise around this medical issue, because I don't know the answer. That kind of makes logical sense to me.
No, I'm not finger pointing at Bonnie Henry, and I do think the province is responding very well overall to this pandemic. Mm-hmm. Just some of the policy things that are, we aren't really being told why these decisions are being made. And we just have to live with them. And I'm sure we'll live with this and we'll get through it.
April 19th can't come quick enough for all of us, can it? But I think we're all going to feel a lot better as we enter spring and May, when there's a lot of, at least in the past, there were festivals there. It's that sort of entry point gateway to summer. Yeah.
We just got to get our vaccines, John. We got to get our vaccines.
Right.
The vaccines are trickling in. They're trickling in, and it's not the province's fault. I think the province has the system going. And for people in their 60s, we're expecting to be able to register in April to get in for our shots, at least our first shot. And that's good news.
Yay.
But I think they're celebrating. We've got 11% of Canadians have now got their first shot of a vaccine, while in the United States, Biden is saying by the 19th of April, 90% of Americans will have their vaccinations.
I cannot wait to read the books on the kind of stuff that's going on right now that we don't know about. Why is it that we're not even at 25%? I get it if there's no lack of supply, but 90 versus 11? Are you kidding?
Yeah, well, I do think, again, we'll talk to Kevin about this, but, there was a deal between Canada and China for a vaccine. And at the last second, the Chinese government cut the tie and we were left high and dry with no explanation. And we think it has something to do with Huawei and a lot of other things that have nothing directly to do with vaccines, but we're being punished. And so that's a factor. That's a factor.
Yeah.
So a couple of quick short snappers before we get into the meat of our show, Johnny.
Totally.
Okay, I'd like to ask you, the Alaskan government is talking about cutting a deal where, at least for this next year, cruise ships out of Seattle don't have to stop in Vancouver or Victoria. They can just go on to Ketchikan, Juneau, and Skagway, and it keeps that industry alive in Alaska. I mean, how dangerous is this for places like Victoria?
1,000% dangerous. I mean, our tourism industry is like it's in World War III. This tourism industry has been decimated. I don't get why government hasn't been under like a 3-alarm fire to try to help this. And taking the cruise ships out of Victoria? Are you kidding? Devastating. Devastating.
Well, I don't know how we can have the cruise ships come if people here haven't got their vaccinations. The irony is that most Americans on those cruise ships will have had theirs. So I don't believe they'll be bringing COVID-19 into the province. So I don't know. We've made a decision nationally, and we have a situation now where our travel industry is really on its back. And then we hear the Alaskans, and I can't blame them, want to keep their industry alive. You just hope our cruise industry will say, well, this is a 1-year thing. We'll come back to Victoria because our customers like it so much. I hope that's true.
That just has to be the case. Like, if this is a long-term solution, we're going to have to start building cruise ships in Victoria and launching them out of our harbor.
Well, I just hope the industry can recover quickly. We'll talk more about that. We've got to get more into tourism. We've got to get a tourism person.
Don't we? Yes, sir.
And dig deep on that. And one more short snapper for you, John. I wanted to ask you about something I saw in the Times Colonist recently, where they were saying that people are complaining too much. That the articles in the Times Colonist, letters to the editor, the op-eds, there's all sorts of complaints going on about Clover Point or crime downtown or tent cities. And there's a suggestion there's too much complaining. We're simply exercising too much complaining. And are we doing that, or are we exercising our democratic right of speech?
So, Robin, you and I have been around the block a while, and we've been involved in service-based industries, you in journalism and broadcasting, and everyone has a right to say whatever they want to say. And that goes for the positive side too. It's generally considered that of all the complaints that come into, let's say, a store or a company or a government office, the complainers will always be the majority. That's what the complainers complain. Well, the people that are positive and have a good outlook on things or feel very good about the service, they generally don't. So I go way out of my way. If I get good service anywhere, if something good happens to me by another company, another business organization, I say something. Go ahead, complain as much as you want. What we need are people who think positively about things, as you and I do. We started this podcast.
On the other hand, John, though, you've got civic governments that don't actually have an opposition. So if you're unhappy about decisions being made at the municipal or city level, I mean, how else do you?
Well, that's a good point. Excellent. So, in other words, either way we look at it, there should be no complaining about complaining. But if you have something to say that's positive, do it. Write to the editor. Write on your Facebook page. Write on a LinkedIn page. Do a small podcast. Do a small YouTube video. Do it. Say it. Talk about it.
Well, speaking of free speech, we now are going to be joined by our special guest, Realtor Kevin Singh from DFH Realty, who will explain the price of homes, why everything's just exploding right now. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, Kevin is also deeply involved in the Chinese community on Vancouver Island. He was born in Victoria, big part of the Victoria community, but also part of that community that have been here for well over 100 years and are very important to us. And he's not particularly happy to see all this racial intolerance. So we'll want to hear more from Kevin Singh on that.
Hey, Kevin, how are you this fine morning?
Hi, guys. Glad to be here.
Right on. You know, Kevin, just for the 38,000. Oh, actually, Kevin, for today, it's 38 million. You really ramped up our viewership. For all those folks, you and I go back a while.
Because they're all related.
Right. You and I go back a while to Mount Doug. We're both Mount Doug grads out in Gordon Head.
all the way back to Arbutus, I think.
Hey, you and I got stuff on each other. That's why we're going to have to be nice to each other. The rumble today will have to be Robin.
Photos, but I don't think Robin can handle them.
You see, he's now like, you know, I wish I hadn't done this. Hey? But, you know, Kevin, we got you on, and you are an owner of a very successful real estate company, and we wanted to talk about real estate because it's the dominant economic issue in our society. And tell us why, in a period of economic downturn, when people aren't working, when few of us are gathering together, house prices are going through the roof. Please explain to us, because I'm asked about that all the time.
Okay. For one, in our little corner of the world, I would guesstimate about 80% of our GDP did not stop working, did not stop collecting a paycheck.
Right.
So I think part of the challenge is that we're not separating out the hyperbole and actually looking at what's really going on.
Oh, we like hyperbole, Kevin.
I get that, but you know,
let's all spell it.
Hyperbole.
Right.
Comes after the Super Bowl.
Fantastic.
So you know, if you look at our market as a really interesting example, not one teacher was laid off, not one government worker was laid off, not one military person was laid off, not one doctor, nurse. I mean, all of those areas we're even still hiring. Every university professor was collecting a big paycheck, even though they weren't working very hard, because they were pre-recording all of their lectures and posting them online for their students.
Mm-hmm.
There's, you know, we're getting caught up into this notion that our economy was going to hell in a handbasket, and it wasn't. We have an extraordinary amount of sympathy and empathy for those in the hospitality business. Our tourism sector got kicked in the teeth, but Victoria has matured in the last 2 generations to the point where the tourism industry is not the dominant industry anymore. If you look at the $1 billion a year that is generated out of high tech, and the largest employer in this market isn't the provincial government anymore, it's the federal government. And so there's no reason for our economic circumstances to have been dictating any decline in the housing market.
Okay.
What we have seen is a lot of people not spending money in the hospitality side.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're doing is they're paying off their credit cards and they're saving money, and the interest rates have gone to historical lows, and the opportunity to change their circumstances was there. Couple that with the circumstances that we face with 13 little fiefdoms, the municipalities, who spend way too much time not doing their part to relieve the housing issue. Our housing issue is not a price issue. Our housing issue is not affordability. Our housing issue all runs down to supply. And if you have municipalities screwing around, wasting all their time hollow virtue signaling about, oh, we need more parks and green space, and we need to increase the environmental
Protections
and so on and so forth. All you're doing is adding cost to housing. The Step 3 code, which the BC government was, I don't know why, but they found it necessary to try and create this issue where we would be net zero emission in new homes built by 2032. Step 3 out of 5 steps adds $58,000 to every single unit built. So,
Robin, how did we not get Kevin on sooner? This is great information.
There hasn't been time, John. There just hasn't been time. You know, there's another vodcaster that I have been speaking to in the last week, a guy named Matt Dell, who also reports on issues in Greater Victoria, and he was tweeting the other day that the Tim Hortons in Esquimalt has now closed its doors because it simply can't find employees to work there. And he was mentioning that it's tough for young people or people on fixed income that are older to afford to live in Victoria. The housing prices have gotten so high. Now, I know there's a rental freeze because of the pandemic, so you can't say that that's been affected. But just the same, we have a problem about where are our working people in this city going to live in the future if everybody has to live in a $1 million+ home?
Robin, the provincial government screwed every possible tenant with their rent freeze. You think about this. If I can't, because my taxes as a landlord didn't go down, my hydro bill didn't go down, all the expenses around being a landlord didn't go down. They all went up 5-6% because, again, municipalities don't have a revenue problem, they have a spending problem. So what happens is if I can't make money being a landlord, I'm going to sell my property. Right? There's a ready market because we're so low in supply. I'm going to make money selling my property and we're going to boot the tenants. Where are the tenants going to go?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is ridiculous when governments get in the middle of a free market system. It just doesn't work in housing. And if you want to really, really build affordable housing in this market, increase the supply. That's all you have to do. We are on the corner of an island. We're not making any more land. What are we going to do here? I mean, as soon as you start going down this path, it becomes ridiculous. So municipalities, every municipality is creating more parkland. What are you doing? Well, you're squeezing the supply of land. So the price of land goes up. I mean, it's a never-ending cycle. And until we get our politicians to, I don't know what, they're so frustrating.
So I have
Kevin, can I just ask, like the housing boom, is it just going to keep going? I mean, we keep hearing that there could be a roaring 20s after the pandemic. Is the housing market going to match that?
Well, here's the problem. And this is actually a worldwide problem. I've been known to make the comment, unless you're in a war zone, prices are increasing just about in every jurisdiction in the Western world. United States, every one of my colleagues in our affiliated network, I mean, they're all suffering from the same thing. There's just no supply. And the challenge is that those of us who live in these, large single family homes and all the rest of it, we don't want an apartment block built in our backyard. So you're getting a lot of pushback. So the prices are going to continue to rise because you can't build the desired supply fast enough. A balanced market in Greater Victoria is about 3,600 available properties at any time. We haven't risen above 1,400 in a year.
Wow.
We're at half of what, Robin, the only way we're going to fix this is if you wake up tomorrow morning and some housing ferry, drop 2,000 new units in this market. It's not, we can't get to balanced. We can't get there fast enough.
So Kevin, this does allude to questions that I've heard twice from friends who own a couple of places. One is their primary, one is sort of if they've inherited a condo or some other retirement facility. And they're going, I got to sell now because I hear that everything's selling $100,000 over the asking price. Okay. And I see that as just sort of gravy, and if I sell a year from now, that gravy is going to be gone. So then I kind of go through some kind of rational explanation why I don't think that's going to happen, but I want to hear your opinion. How would you answer that question?
Well, I think we're getting fairly close to another price plateau because we are starting to experience buyer fatigue, and there's only so much you can afford. And the buyers are always the drivers of the market. I mean, they will stop when the value starts to become an issue. In 2016-17, you'll have the provincial government saying that they're the reason why housing took a pause. Well, it did not because there was a shortage of inventory, not because of anything, except that they threw the uncertainty into the system by declaring that they were going to do this spec tax in their February of 2018 budget, and then waffled around while they tried to find a political path to actually roll it out in October of that year. So we hit the pause button, not because of market conditions. We hit the pause button because we had a provincial government that didn't know what the hell they were doing. They made this huge pronouncement that this tax was going to fund social housing and affordable housing, all the rest of it. And they put in a tax regime that costs them more than what it costs to collect the money. I mean, it's just it's just futile because they're trying to fix something the wrong way. They don't understand the mechanics of the economy. And quite frankly, the smartest thing they could have done at the time is they should have forced every municipality in this province to go through the process of approving new housing within a reasonable amount of time. Good example is my old office building on Shelburne Street.
Mm-hmm.
It took 3.5 years for that project, which, by the way, was submitted with everything like lined up exactly the way the zoning required it to be lined up. There was nothing about it that was offside with the zoning. It took 3.5 years to get to a public hearing. Right?
Why is that, Kevin? How come?
60 housing units that are literally 5 years too late.
But why, Kevin?
Because you have ingrained bureaucracies in our municipalities who are designed to say no.
Robin,
I do want to jump on
It's
something else though you just said about the market and we brought in the new taxes if you own two homes and the speculation taxes and all of these things. And let's face it, Kevin, a lot of people are associating the reason for this as being offshore money. And when they say offshore money, they mean money from Hong Kong and mainland China. And there are people that point fingers.
They were looking at this face when they brought in that tax. Okay.
So, I mean, I just want to get into that.
And this is going to lead to our other topic, but if you want systemic racism against Asians, our provincial government was leading the way and flying the flag. They weren't screaming about foreign buyers. That was a euphemism for Chinese people. Come on, right? I mean, if the huge increase in activity in our real estate industry was based on American buyers or Swiss buyers or German buyers, you would have had nothing for political fodder, absolutely zero. So here's the fact. At the end of the day, when they calculated the actual impact, the actual amount of real estate purchases by buyers not of Canadian or offshore buyers, so buyers not from British Columbia, okay? And this includes Albertans and Ontarians, as well as the dreaded foreign people. It was 3.2%. It doesn't affect the market. And by the way, they were buying things that most of us couldn't afford. Right? I mean, how does taxing someone who's buying a $5 million home in West Vancouver affect the average home purchaser?
Yeah.
It doesn't. It was a tax grab. Well, and shame on this government for flying a racist flag to make it work politically.
And it's been tied into other things now, Kevin. I mean, there was that. And then, the pandemic gets underway and guys like Donald Trump are calling it the China pandemic and Wuhan. And then on top of that, we have a very aggressive government in Beijing that are holding Canadians because they're mad that we've got one of the chief executives from Huawei on house arrest in a mansion in Shaughnessy, but still under house arrest in Vancouver. And so there's this.
All want that one.
There's this huge backlash against the Chinese government, and I think that people here are being victimized because of it.
And part of it is because it's the Asian face in North America is an easy mark because typically we're not particularly we're not radical. It's just, our parents wanted us all to be doctors and accountants, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for one, it's an easy target. I mean, we're visible, right? And
Now, do you feel it? Have you felt it yourself, Kevin?
oh yeah, like I mean, it's always it's there. I mean, you can't.
Has it become worse with Trump's shenanigans?
Oh well, absolutely, particularly south of the border. But you've got in Victoria, your Chinese population isn't that big. I mean it's significant actually, but we're spread around a little too much. In Vancouver, Toronto, it's pretty concentrated, and it plays into a lot of issues around work ethic and success from hard work and so on and so forth. People just keep their heads down to make things better. I mean, there was this the big commercial real estate boom in Vancouver was Hong Kong money coming in, and the typical North American investor couldn't understand why all of a sudden all of the big buildings are being bought up by Hong Kong interests. Well, I mean, the Chinese culture is all about the long term. I mean, when you've been a functional society for 5,000 years, I mean, you're way ahead of the curve, and you're certainly not investing for a 10-year return.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're looking at it so that your grandchildren or great grandchildren are going to be doing fine. I mean, that's the way it's always been, and that by nature and the willingness to work for future generations, not just for yourself, is pretty contrary to the standard North American thinking about how you get along in this world. We just make easy targets because we're seen and we're misunderstood in a lot of ways. So here's the thing: most of us of Chinese extraction, who were born and raised in North America, are really having a tough time with the Chinese government. I mean, that's just normal. I mean, they're a bunch of bullies. They're not holding up their end as citizens of this world, and really they should be sanctioned. And kudos to Michael Chong, the Conservative MP, and who stood up and said what he said, and through his subcommittee in Parliament, I mean, it's just calling a spade a spade. I mean, what the Chinese government's doing to the Uyghur minority in that Xinjiang province is unconscionable. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And then what they do on the business level, how they encourage Chinese companies to rip off North American and European patents, all of that stuff. I mean, it's just not on. I mean, look, when you get a Chinese immigrant coming to North America, I mean, they're bringing the best of what they can to these shores, and are going to work their damnedest to be good Canadian or American citizens. I mean, they have no interest in what the Chinese government. They escaped China, for crying out loud. It's no different than what happened with my grandfather coming here in 1900. I mean, they're just looking to build a better life, and certainly not under those restrictions. I mean, what they've done to Hong Kong is abominable. Mm. I mean, those poor people who really are. I mean, what China's done there has violated international law, and our government, our prime minister, is so weak, he doesn't say a damn thing. I mean, he's letting everybody else speak. When the Conservatives put the motion on the floor regarding the atrocities and genocide against the Uyghurs, every single member of the Liberal cabinet abstained. That's not leadership. That's BS. Those guys should be all fired, not standing up for people who are weaker. I mean, that's not the Canadian way at all.
Kevin, we have secretly, Robin and I, scouted out for a co-host when, I quite possibly just don't wake up or forget. And you,
John,
you,
you know,
you
when we're doing this at 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm assuming it's because you just got home.
yeah, he really knows me. That's fantastic.
No, John was awake at 10:30 to be ready for the show. That was
Right. So this is exactly the kind of rumbling that we want to have on the Rumble Room. Well done. Well done.
Well,
so. Kevin, I'll give you a final word here. We're okay. It's just as a prophecy on the market. I'm somebody who's looking at Vancouver Island, but more specifically Victoria as a place to come. Is this a good time to buy a home, or are they smarter to wait this out and maybe it'll all settle down or even out? I mean, what's the future hold? You give us the final word.
my feeling right now is because of buyer fatigue and the fact that we hopefully will be pretty close to herd immunity by the beginning of August, because the vaccination programs, don't get me on that one. I have the feeling that we'll be going through a bit of a pause. As I said earlier, I think we're sort of getting to a price plateau. That doesn't mean we'll get going again, but I think that there's enough exhaustion that things will start to, other things will become bigger priorities. And if I would look at normal real estate patterns, you have families who didn't get to go away last August. That's a good chunk of our market that will probably be looking for an opportunity to get out of town. That'll take some of the pressure off of what's going on. We're starting to see more listings right now. We certainly haven't gotten out of the hole yet, but I think if we can start creeping towards at least last year's numbers, where by mid-spring we were at about 1,900 available properties, it will start to take some of the tension and a lot of the heat out of things. It'll settle down. It still won't be, we will, as I said earlier, we will never be able to get back to balance unless we can magically make 2,000 more properties appear. It's just not going to happen. So, basic Econ 100 stuff, right? Supply and demand. The demand is going to be continuing to be higher. We have high-tech firms that are hiring our young people. Household creation in Southern Vancouver Island has been massive. When you think about what it was like when John and I were going to UVic a million years ago, we all had to leave town to find our careers. Most of us, that's what our focus was. I mean, some of us were lucky enough to stick around, but so many of our classmates left town. That's not the case now. People don't want to leave. So the numbers, we used to talk about the net migration of about 2,000 people to Greater Victoria every year. One of the numbers that we were not paying a lot of attention to was new household creation by young people who didn't have to leave. And that's where a lot of the new pressure has been. So is it going to be over shortly? No. Is it going to continue in this vein? I would guess for some time. I mean, probably interest rates will have more of an effect, but the chances of interest rates coming up to a level to really impact the market in the next 2 years, pretty small, I would guess. I think we're in this for a while. I think strategically it's find your place, pick your lane and try and stay in it without getting too frustrated.
Well, that was great. Thanks very much, Kevin Singh. And we're just about out of time here on Victoria Rumble Room, and a really great show. Coming up next week, we've got a very good topical show as well. Matt Waterman from the Victoria City Police Union is going to come in and talk to us about policing in Victoria. There have been suggestions that laws are getting laxer and policing's getting harder, and they're not getting a lot of love from some members of council who maybe feel we have too many police and need more social workers. So I'd like to hear more about how the police feel their jobs are functioning in this day and age, in the days of a lot of social consciousness about homelessness and people that are downtrodden downtown, and maybe some backlash against police from other parts of the world, not necessarily in Victoria, but a backlash against police and things like Black Lives Matter, police brutality, issues like that. So Matt Waterman will be here to address all of that. Looking forward to it, John.
Yeah, I'm so am I. That'll be a great show, as was today. I think we heard a lot of facts. We had a lot of objective talk today from Kevin. That's really appreciated and helps people understand what's going on in our community a little more, which is why this show has had such tremendous interest. I encourage folks to market this show. Go onto our Facebook page, Victoria Rumble Room, search for it, share it amongst your network. All of these videos are inventoried on our YouTube site, Victoria Rumble Room with Robin and John. Search for that, and then like those videos, like the posts that we put on. We have been told by by a lot of people that the information they're receiving from this show is very helpful. And so that's great. That's affirmation that what we were doing, Robin, as fun is actually providing some value. So please do consider spreading it out amongst your network. My name is John Juricic.
And I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.